Speak to Glyn Williams, a professor of Islamic history at the University of Massachusetts, author of 3 books about Russia and Ukraine. Professor, thank you so much for coming back to us. You were with us this time 24 hours ago. Things are moving fairly quickly. This meeting that's supposed to be taking place on the border between Ukraine and Belarus, how much do you believe in Russian sincerity, especially considering the Ukrainians said that at 1500 GMT, which is 3 hours ago, Iskander missiles were fired into Ukrainian territory from Belarus. Belarus, of course, being Russia's main ally in the region.
It remains to be seen. By all measures, it looks like Vladimir Putin's invasion has not become a sort of shock and awe conquest of territory like they expected. It's hard to verify, but the Ukrainians, just about an hour ago, announced that they've killed 4,500 Russian federal forces, troops. So, these images we're seeing on TV right now of these burning Russian tanks, of columns being wiped out. A column of Chechens were wiped out just a few hours ago. So the invasion seems to have stalled. It is no shock and awe, and this may give Putin some impetus to try negotiating in good faith. But then again, this is Vladimir Putin, and you can't really trust anything he says at face value. He claims he's fighting Nazis in Ukraine when he's the one actually acting like Adolf Hitler.
Much has been talked about the sanctions that Western nations are placing on Russia. In the latest set of sanctions, all Russian aircraft, obviously military, but including commercial as well as private aircraft, are going to be banned from EU airspace. And one word was used in that press briefing by the European Union: oligarchs. How important are oligarchs, and how significant would sanctions against Russian oligarchs who live in Western countries, many of whom have different nationalities apart from their Russian status? How important is that group of ultra-rich people to the Kremlin?
Very important. These are Putin's cronies. They rose to power with him, seizing all the assets in Russia, and most of them have invested their nest eggs in places like London. There's a lot of these oligarchs who have their money, their houses, their retirement invested in places like London. So stopping them from using the SWIFT code, for one thing, for transferring money, and also stopping them from flying. Just a few hours ago, there were flights that were turned back to Moscow from airports in France and England. So this will have a devastating impact on these oligarchs who live half their lives, and many of them live much of their lives in the West, especially London.
It's been said that Vladimir Putin is trying to rewrite the security structure of Europe, but he seems to have done that in terms of how other countries are reacting to Russian action in Ukraine. Sweden is going back on a decades-old policy. It has now said in the past hour or so that it's going to send weapons to Ukraine. Germany, of course, 24 hours ago did exactly the same thing, and Germany's always had this policy of not sending weapons directly to another nation. Its arms industry is very well established, and it does sell a lot of weapons, but they generally go through a third nation. The world order is changing, but possibly not in the way that Vladimir Putin wanted.
I agree. NATO has never been more unified than it has in the face of this aggression. And the sheer fact that the Germans, as you mentioned, who have a long history, almost in their founding rules, of not sending weapons to belligerents, they're mocked just 2 days ago for sending helmets to Ukrainians. But now they've done an about-face, and they're sending all sorts of weapons, including Stingers and anti-aircraft missiles and Javelin anti-tank missiles. So, they've really mobilized the European Union, NATO, and 2/3 of the world's economies have joined in the sanctions against Russia. So if he intended to bully and dominate the world, the exact opposite has happened. He's really unified NATO like never before.
Where does Vladimir Putin go next?
I think his next move will be try to directly annex Luhansk and Donetsk, these regions out there in the east. He may try just bunkering down and trying to demand that Vladimir Zelensky and his elites step out of power. He may try freezing the war for now, or storming into Kiev. But when he goes into Kiev, it'll be a different scenario. Russian troops stormed into Grozny, Chechnya, back in 1994, and 7,500 Russians were killed. So attacking Kiev, this will be a massive urban warfare. and the Ukrainians will grind them down. It could be a meat grinder. So I think he's taking a very risky gamble if he does try invading Kiev. As we saw in Mosul or Aleppo, urban fighting often turns against the invaders. Heavy tanks aren't very useful, and partisans or guerrillas or insurgents can really mitigate technological and military advantages by using a sort of urban forest to attack Russian troops and then turn Kiev perhaps into another meat grinder like Kobani, for example, or Grozny in the early 90s.
Professor, thank you so much indeed. Once again, Glyn Williams from the University of Massachusetts. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.